All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Nick Klosky, co-founder of Honeypoint 3D, and welcome to the November 2016 3D printing and 3D design webinar. Last month we had a little bit of technical difficulties. I thought it was with an external hard drive, but it might have been this because of this webinar software actually. So if the audio kind of glitches out, I apologize beforehand, and the full actual replay will be on our YouTube channel for Honeypoint 3D. So I just want to say that now before we have any difficulties, if we do have any. I don't know if we will. So I want to say welcome to everybody. We had a really good turnout actually last month in the live as well as replays. So if you're watching this after the fact, we have these webinars monthly, and you're encouraged to join. They're free, and ask questions beforehand, and generally just get your 3D printing and 3D design questions answered. So we have the ability for you to ask questions, and I would really suggest that you ask your questions if you're listening on this live. I really want to make sure that you get the information that you need in order to be successful at 3D printing and 3D design and all of that. I certainly have some things that I want to talk about, as well as some questions that have stacked up over the course of this month, but I just want to make sure that I honor the people who are here and answer their questions. And we also have our CTO who's in the other room, and he might actually come in a little bit later, so if he does, I will introduce him to you. But with that said, I don't have any questions, for right off the bat. So I want to go to answering a couple of questions that people asked in this previous month. We had a couple questions about management of things in Meshmixer and Fusion 360, so I wanted to kind of go into that. The first one was a question about working with meshes inside of Meshmixer, and then when you bring them into Fusion, seeing if there's any way of keeping things up to date. Kind of like how Fusion does. So as you may or may not know, in about a month or two ago, Fusion brought out a mesh workspace inside of Fusion where you could work with meshes and do a lot of cool things. I'll talk about that a little bit later with some examples. But the short answer is no. Meshes, when they come into Fusion, are called base features, which means they are kind of a lump. You can go into direct editing mode and do some editing of them, and then once you go out of that, if you've drastically changed the mesh, actually nothing else in your parametric model updates. It's kind of a they're not parametric at all for right now. Actually, I'm not aware of really any CAD modeling program that treats meshes in any parametric way. There's just too much stuff to track. So sadly, there's no way to do that. So there's that. We had another question about modeling something with threaded inserts. So the question was, actually don't know if I have anything with threads around it here. I guess I don't, but the question was, somebody has something with a male part that has threads on it, and how do you model the threads in whatever programs out there, Meshmixer or Fusion or whatever, and get the threads. So I'm very that it just crashed again, but I will try to share it. If people out there, let me know if the audio crashed or not. I think probably it did, and I think this is probably the last time that I'll be using this this webinar software, sadly. So what I'm going to do is just stop the broadcast, because this is what happened last time, and sadly I will have to see you all in replay. So I will bring myself back up here. Oh, and my camera isn't even working now. Not good. All right. So let's continue the replay without looking at me, and we'll just jump right over into Fusion. The way to answer that question about the threading is actually very easy. So we go into create a box right here, like this. I will pop the box up, and I will create a cylinder that is going down. Like that. That kind of cuts into the box. So that's great. So this would be the female for this. We can go down here and say create a thread. And we can click on the cylinder. We just kind of hover over and go like this. And we click on it. And then you can select whatever profile you want, right? You have all these different profiles to choose. Acme screw threads, DIN pipe threads, and then what size you want, and it'll actually change the size of the cylinder, so you won't get some like weird thing. And you could say, you know, right-handed or left-handed, and then you click on OK. Now what this does is it just shows you the threads. It hasn't actually modeled them. Those aren't actually modeled right there. They just kind of look like threads. If you want to do that, you would actually, when you're creating the thread, click on this modeled right here, like that, and then click OK. And now you see as I hover over, I'm actually hovering over this coil right here. And that is completely modeled with, actually, I can go in here to section analysis and cut this away. And you'll see that it actually is cut. So that's pretty awesome. So that's how you model threads. And again, I'm very sorry to those of you on live. I just have to figure out how to fix this webinar stuff. So I really apologize for that, but I will get to more of your questions. So hopefully that answers the question about the threading. And then you can, print this. If you have a printer that is good enough to resolve the resolution of these threads, then awesome. So let's kind of, I'll close this out. I had some questions from a gentleman named Gary about Meshmixer. So let's start up Meshmixer and talk about what Meshmixer is. Fill up the screen here. So Gary's question was more about how to get started with Meshmixer. And so I'll just do a very quick overview for you and everybody else out there who just kind of wants a very brief overview. Now, Meshmixer requires you to start with something, so you can import a bunny, import an existing object. If you want something else, you have to import one of these and then get rid of it. So let's just start with a bunny like this. So Meshmixer is a shell-based modeling tool. You see that this bunny comes in without a bottom. And so as a very general statement, if you hold down the space key, it gives you some options for different cameras. One trick is if the things are darkened, they are enabled. So right now, snapping and free are not enabled because they're still light. So if you see, I can freely move around, but I can't turn the way I want to. So if I go to free movement, now I can turn the way I want to in any degree that I want. If I turn on snapping, what happens is once I get to a kind of a cardinal direction, like there, boom, it kind of clicks and snaps there. I usually have both of these enabled just to allow free movement. This is how you want to see the mesh. You can click like this if you want to kind of play with something that's like digital clay and you really don't want to see the faces. If you do want to see the faces, the bunny is now shaded with the according to the normals. So there's kind of like a light coming from where your face is, and it comes out. And then this is for a face group mode. You don't really need that too much because this kind of takes it. Color right here, this is for vertex color. This is only if you're going to be painting your model for color printing. Really, you want to keep it on this one, which allows you, when you create a face group like this, to allow you to keep track of where those face groups are. So like if I had a couple of face groups right here, I could keep track of where those face groups are. So that's one thing. Working with multiple bodies is another thing. So if I go in here and, sorry, I was just trying to get a mosquito that was flying here. If I go in here and I hit the T key for transform and I hit the D key for duplicate, I've actually duplicated this bunny. And now I can move this other bunny out. And I click accept. It's duplicated the bunny and the face groups, which is pretty cool. And now we have something called an object browser here that have two different objects. You can also go up to here and say view, hide, or show objects browser right there. So over here you have two little eyes. If you don't want to see one of these, you can turn visibility off. Whatever one is highlighted is the one you're looking at. So if I turn off visibility of this one, it disappears. If I turn off visibility of this one, it's called a transparent target. It kind of shows, well, hey, you turned off the visibility, but you have it selected. Now if I select this one, that one will disappear. But I can bring it back with the eye like that. So these objects, and actually let me make it a little bit more clear. So even if these objects are overlapping each other like this, let's make it a little bit different like that. There we go. Even though the objects are overlapping like this, they are separate objects completely. So if I start to do a select operation on one, I will not be selecting the other. If I hide the other one, you see that my selection has just gone in here, underneath. So these are separate objects completely. Even though they intersect, even though they take up the same kind of physical space, this is called an intersection. Oops, wrong key there. This is called an intersection. You don't actually have any seam right here. It kind of goes inside of each other. If you want to see inside, you would click on the shaders over here on the left and select this kind of ghostly one, which is the X-ray shader. And it can kind of get hard to see, but you can see where things intersect with other things using the X-ray shader. Like that. And go back to the normal Meshmixer one like that. Now, the next step, if you wanted these things really to be in the same object, if you wanted to manipulate them together, you would hold down either the Shift or Control key and select both of those in the objects browser, and then you would go to combine. So what combine means is it says just lump these into the same object. They're still intersecting. There's no seam in between the two objects, but now they're considered in the same body. But still, if I hit the select key, I'm not going to go to the other object because this selection is only going on contiguous surfaces, and this one intersects it, but it intersects it so infinitely thin that nothing passes through. I would have to select the other one to actually select it. So that is kind of how to deal with multiple bodies. Now, let me undo these a little bit. I can go in and let me just repair these and for a second to give you the kind of last thing. So I just filled in the bottom of these bunnies using the inspector. So if I select both of these now and I select both of these, you can do some comparison if you click on analysis, but I want to click on edit. I can now, instead of combining, say a Boolean union, and Meshmixer will think about that and show you that there is going to be some seams it's going to be closing. I click accept. And now this actually is, if I turn on wireframe, that actually is a boundary. If I click on the select brush and I select over, it'll go to the other side because those are the same objects. So the Boolean union is very, very cool because then once you go into the sculpt tool, like with a sculpt brushes robust smooth, make it a little bit bigger, turn off wireframe. You can kind of hit that with a smooth brush and smooth out that seam in between the two objects, and you have a really good seam in between them, like that. Now, if you were to print this out, you really couldn't tell the difference between these two things. They would be all interspersed. So it's just a very kind of quick overview on how to work with multiple objects inside of Meshmixer. And Gary, if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to help you out. Now, a couple other things I want to talk about with Fusion. There was a lot of really good updates that came out in the actually in the past few days. So I would encourage you to go look. If you go up here, you maybe can't see this, but if you click on the little question mark up here, there are product roadmaps up here. There are all sorts of things. So if you click on product roadmap, it'll take you to the Fusion webpage for the roadmaps and see what was just delivered. And you can click on all sorts of things up here to show like the Fusion 360 design validated document is the main forum for Fusion 360, and inside of here they'll kind of announce like new updates and things like that. So this was done on Thursday, getting to know the event simulation. A lot of really cool things that go on with Fusion all the time in here. So a couple things I just wanted to very quickly talk about is how to use meshes inside of Fusion. I've done this before, but I want to kind of show you. So let's say that you find an STL on the web. You can go to Insert and say Insert Mesh. And I'm going to go to a torch. So I modeled this, but a lot of times you don't have the regular CAD file. You just have something like this. This isn't really usable inside of Fusion as it is, but there are some tricks you can do to make this a little bit more usable. So we inserted this mesh here. You can't do much with it. You certainly can edit the mesh, and there are some Meshmixer tools inside of here. So remeshing, reducing, smoothing, cutting, things like that. So you can do a bit in here. Meshmixer is still more full featured. But let's say if you wanted to find some information about these holes and things like that. So I'm going to go here into the model environment and create a sketch. I'll just create it, maybe somewhere, on the plane right here. And we could do some really cool things under Sketch Mesh. You would say Create Mesh Section. So it brings you into this mesh body, and you click on this, and then it asks you what section you want to create. So I'm going to rotate it this way, 90 degrees, and then move it back, and you can kind of see this amber color going through this whole thing. So I'm going to click on top here and move it maybe right into the center like that. Looks good. And click OK. And now you see there's a little amber line right there. All right. So now if we turn off the bodies, we can see that this is a section of the mesh. So if we do create a new sketch like this, and you have to create new sketches for all of these, which is kind of a pain, but you do. And you go to Mesh, you would say Fit Curves to Mesh Section. So the fit curve type, you have some up here, and I'm going to say that this is a spline, and it's a closed spline. So I can click on this right around here. And it changed it because I kind of did it upside down, but you can kind of get the idea like this. So this created a, I'm not actually sure why it did that, but it's not too accurate. So I created what's called a closed spine, which means that it kind of did this little loopy. That may not be the best way. So let me try to do it a different way. So instead of fit curves to mesh section right here, so instead of saying this is a closed spline, why don't I just say that this is a line, right? And so I'm going to hover over, and it's going to be like this. So the first point on section, it should be working. Let's see. Now sometimes it gets a little bit confused, so let me go back and do this again. Mesh, fit curves to mesh, oops, no. Create mesh section, there we go. Oh, it did it because I imported it kind of upside down. So let's do a different one. Let's do a mesh section. Turn this 90 degrees here and move it kind of back and click OK. Awesome. All right, so we're going to create a sketch on any plane that we want. and I'm going to say sketch to fit curves to mesh section. And you can kind of see this amber line right here, and it's actually bringing it in as kind of a centered thing. But I'm actually not sure why it's moving it over like that. I'll have to do some research on that later. But I am going to click on this with a tolerance of, try to do a bigger tolerance like that, and click OK. Awesome. So it brought it in, and I'm able to do some measurements, right? I can do a line. Actually, let me turn off this body. I can do some measurements, right? So if I, even on the one beforehand, I can click on here and see that this is about 72 millimeters from center to center. So I can start doing some reverse engineering from this to see how this was made and use these sections to create different things, which is pretty cool. So I just kind of wanted to go in and say that you can use this mesh section thing to create pretty complex objects from other things. So as I don't think that I can loft between these until they're actual sections, but you can create multiple sections and loft to them. So that's a pretty awesome thing that I actually use quite a bit as well. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, I bring up a lot, but I don't want people to forget about the Patchwork Space. I use this actually all the time during the month, where literally you can create a sketch and draw a spline like this, just a 2D spline. And in the Patchwork Space, if you go to create extrude and click on that, you can actually create a single-sided body of your doodle, right? And then you can right-click on this and say thicken and thicken it, like that. And you get a really awesome shape that was actually really easy to create. You didn't need to create a sketch that was, this rectangle going all the way through. You just thickened it. So the way that this could work is if you created a sketch like this, normally you would have to go, if you wanted to make, an L like this, you would have to say, oh, okay, I want this to be 5 millimeters wide, like that. All right, and then I go down here, and I don't really know 5 millimeters. It's going to be somewhere down here, so let's just go like this. And then this is going to be 5 millimeters up at 90 degrees, and then this goes over like this, and then you have to go in and trim that out, and now you have a 5 by 5, right? So you would bring this out, and then you would extrude this, 50 millimeters to get an L bracket. Now, the other way of doing that, however, is before you do any of those other lines, you have just this L, and you say stop sketch. You go into patch, and you extrude this 50 millimeters. And now you can use the create thicken command to say, I want this to now be, I could have to select both of those. I'm going to thicken this and this by 5 millimeters. So the nice thing about this is that the original sketch right here is just a line. I didn't have to make it 5 millimeters, and then if later I had some change of heart and I wanted it to be 7 millimeters, I would have to go in and change all of these sketch dimensions from 5 to 7. No, in this case, I would go back and I would change this thicken command. If I can click on it properly and say edit feature, I can change it from 5 to 7, and it'll update. So this is a really good trick when you're working with extruding things. Is really don't forget that patch environment, because it can be terribly useful. So again, I really apologize that like nothing is working, the camera and all of that. It was working great for doing video conferencing, all of that, but it sounds like my webinar provider is the one that is somehow messing with it. So I'm sorry, and I will get that fixed for next week. So I will sign off and say thank you so much, and see you next month.